Jewelry making in Providence began in the late 1700s thanks to Cyril Dodge and his nephew Nehemiah. Cyril was the first jeweler to open up shop in Providence in 1784, making and selling clocks and gold and silver jewelry. 10 years later, he retired, and Nehemiah opened his own shop, eventually becoming the first manufacturer of rolled plated gold. It was with these foundations that the industry boomed in Providence throughout the 1800s. Jewelers from Rhode Island were known all across the country, selling all across the newly formed United States. By 1830, there were 27 jewelry firms with 280 employees in Providence. By 1850, there were 57 firms with 590 workers. After the Civil War, businesses continued to grow with 150 shops, employing 2,700 workers. By 1875, 5 years later, Providence accounted for more than 25% of national jewelry production. By 1890, 200 shops had employed 7,000 workers. The late 18th and 19th centuries were defined by rapid building and expansion in the jewelry district of Providence. The Depression in the 1930s stimulated the jewelry industry, as craftsmen began to use their skills to design cheaper products, creating costume jewelry. Costume jewelry was one of the largest exports of the jewelry district, all the way through the 1960s. The jewelry district saw its collapse in the 1970s, when many companies in the area began to go out of business. A lack of demand for costume jewelry and no skilled workers forced the industry to go under in the late 80s and early 90s. However, there are hopes of creating a jewelry renaissance in Providence through Diane Riley students and the jewelry making program at Rhode Island College.
My name is Diane Riley, and I'm an associate professor of art. I'm not a doctor, but I do have my MFA, which is a terminal degree in the arts. The jewelry program is a component of the fine art program at RIC, and we focus on traditional techniques of metalsmithing and jewelry set within a fine art frame. So I teach students how to bend and cut and make one of a kind pieces in metal. So they work with non-ferrous metals, which is copper and brass and sometimes silver, and create things that touch on the history of metalsmithing and the objects that are made within that history, things like chatelaines and usable objects, lockets, keepsake jewelry, and they use that format to create one-of-a-kind works of personal expression. The first project they do is a self-portrait project, and we talk a lot about jewelry as a signifier of one's identity, and creating work that uses layers to conceal and reveal different things about one's identity. And one of the projects was a student who took the idea of the cameo and created a contemporary cameo of herself in metal with layers of her ancestry behind it. So she had stamped in metal old names from people in her family, and she knows a lot about her history, and so she felt a connection with it. There's also, I have them look at the idea of containers, both as a physical object and a concept. So metalsmithing has a long history of creating containers for special purposes. So we look at reliquaries and other things throughout history that metalsmithing has been part of. I think that they are definitely part of the conversation. They're active out there teaching, they're active making, they're taking part in that community that crosses over between industry and fine art. So the idea of community is really important within this area because it's rich history. There are many metalsmithing programs on the South Coast. So there's RIC, there's RISD, there's UMass Dartmouth, there's Mass Art, there's a museum school. So that's 5 programs that have metalsmithing within them. So we support each other, and they are engaging in those conversations. So they do contribute. After you graduate, it is something that you can take with you. So you have a point of view and a language that differs greatly from anybody in the industry when you leave this program. So you can go and get the skills, those skills, to translate it into something that's viable for the industry.